What's going on, guys? Alex here with TFL Bike. Our Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled is due for an oil change, and Case and I decided to tackle it ourselves. Now, if you look in the owner's manual for this bike, it will tell you that the oil change must be done by a Ducati dealership or an authorized Ducati service center. And the problem with that is I do a lot of oil changes, and if I had to pay a dealership every time I needed an oil change done on one of my bikes, I'd be broke. An oil change is something you should be able to do yourself in your garage, and that's why we wanted to do it. We figured, how hard could it be? Well, it turns out an oil change on this bike is about as hard as it gets on any motorcycle. So let's dive into that process and see what it's like. So let's take a look at the issue with the oil change on this Desert Sled. The first thing is the oil filter is right up here and it's sitting on top of the skid plate. So you think, okay, not a huge deal, pull the skid plate out. The regular drain plug is on the bottom of the engine under here. Again, not a big deal. But what is a big deal is this right here, this massive 14mm hex that gets you access to the oil screen, and that's sitting right behind the exhaust. So the exhaust needs to be taken off, and that's probably going to piss off some neighbors when you go to warm up the bike and check the oil level, because you're going to have to do it without an exhaust on. But that right there is not the most clever design. It's a beautiful looking exhaust, but it makes oil changes a huge pain. So the first step usually is to warm up the bike. That way all the oil comes out nice and easy. But we have a couple things to do before that, because once this bike is warmed up, it's going to be almost impossible to get both the skid plate and the exhaust off. So I'm going to do that right now before the bike is even hot. Also, this video is brought to you by Revzilla. So any of the materials and tools you're going to see me using in this video came from Revzilla.com. So if you need drain pan or oil, drain plug washers, oil filter, whatever it might be, check out Revzilla and pick up your supplies. All right, so the skid's off. I'm gonna make sure I keep all the hardware where it needs to go, since these are different size screws. So I'm just gonna put them back where they belong and put this off to the side. All right, now I'm gonna start working on getting this exhaust off. So start with this first bolt on the left side. Now you can see that left side is separated. We'll move over to the right. And now I have a couple options here. I did on the other side too. I could take this bolt off and then it would separate the exhaust from the hanger, but that's a little hard to get to. So I'm just gonna do these two and take the whole bracket off with it. All right, now the whole back end of the exhaust is loose. I just need to get something to pull the spring off, and then I should be able to pull this whole back portion right off. There we go. Big old Ducati can. So part of the exhaust is off, but as you can see, we still don't have access, so we gotta take the middle portion of the exhaust off, which is just these two springs right here. So I think everybody, including Roman, besides the accounting department next door, wants to hear this bike fire up without an exhaust on it. So let's wheel it out, we'll grab Roman and see what he thinks.
It's got a little bit of Harley in it. It kind of sounds like if a Harley and a biplane had a stepchild. That's what it would sound like. Just saying. All right, make that if Harley and one of those, you know, like rotary engine airplanes had a stepchild that then lived underwater with that kind of whoop, 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 whoop. That's what it would sound like.
So on most bikes, you're either gonna have a sight glass to check your oil level, or on the oil fill cap, you'll have a little dipstick. This one has the sight glass on it. So what you're gonna do is just tilt the bike so it's level. If you have a stand, that helps too. and you want the oil to fall between those two tick marks right there. This oil doesn't look particularly too dirty. That's another reason you'd look through the sight glasses to just look at the condition of the oil versus checking the level. Like I said, doesn't look too dirty, but we know based on mileage that this is due for an oil change, so we're gonna do it anyway. All right, now that the bike's warm, I'm gonna get ready to get the old oil out. So I'll take the plug out of my drain pan, put it kind of where it needs to go. Try not to make too big of a mess, but I am really good at getting oil all over the floor. Take my 5mm hex and loosen her up. Now while the oil's draining, you're also going to want to loosen your oil fill plug. That'll make sure you get all the oil you can out of the engine. So take that out. All right, now I'm going to level the bike out just to make sure that every nook and cranny is able to drain. So as you can see, when I picked the bike up and made it level, the stream got a little bit heavier. So I'll just leave it like that for a little bit until it starts to trickle. And then a lot of drain plugs will be magnetic on this end, so you can kind of see what your engine's doing. And this doesn't look too bad. There's definitely a little bit of shavings on here, but a lot of this gunk is just so it looks like some sort of gasket material that might have been on here from the factory. So not too bad, but we'll give this a clean off and make sure it's nice and fresh to go back in. Now there's also gonna be a little crush washer. Sometimes it'll come out with the drain plug, sometimes it'll stay stuck to the engine. This one's staying stuck, so I'm gonna have to pry that off. It's a good idea to replace that pretty much every time you do an oil change, and they're really cheap. This pack right here has a ton of them, and it was $4, so definitely worth picking these up and leaving them in your toolbox. All right, now for the oil filter right here, and ideally I'd be able to spin this off by hand. But nope, that's not gonna happen. So let me grab a strap wrench. So basically, you just put it around your oil filter, and then you're gonna start to spin it on top of itself, just like that, until it gets nice and tight. So spin it off, make sure the catch can is underneath the filter. Give the filter a nice dump upside down. And same deal, just let that drain out. All right, now for the new oil filter. This is a K&N filter, and I like going with the K&N filters because they have a little bolt on the top of them, so if you do manage to over tighten it, you don't have to deal with the strap wrench next time. You can just put a regular socket on there and spin it right off. Before I put that on, I'm gonna take a rag right here and just wipe off the inside of this right here, because once there's a new filter on there, it's gonna be pretty hard to get that cleaned up. So it doesn't need to be perfect. Now I'll take the new filter. It's got this plastic wrap on it, so just pull that off. And the O-ring's already pre-oiled on this filter, but if it's not, just take your hand, just wipe off your oil pan a little bit and just give it a little bit of lubrication on here. Now it's a good idea to fill this with a little bit of oil. You'll have to do less topping off when you're all done, so you wanna get some oil in here. We are using Model 300V 10W40. It's fully synthetic. That's what Ducati wants you to run, is a full synthetic, and this is really nice oil. It's basically a racing oil, but this is a Ducati after all. It's air cooled, it runs hot, so using a high quality oil is definitely worth the money in the long run. It's gonna keep your bike in tip-top shape. And favorite part about this oil, besides the fact that it's got a really convenient pour spout built into the jug, is it's bright green. How cool is that? So just a little bit of oil in there to fill it up. Doesn't need to be anything too crazy. And now line your oil filter up and start spinning it on. And you really don't want to use any tools to tighten this down. Just go hand tight. That'll make your life way easier in the future. These don't need to be crazy tight to do their job. So just spin them on and pretty much hand tight. A little bit of oil on the hands will work just fine. All right, and now for this oil screen. That's the whole reason we had to pull the entire exhaust off. This uses a pretty massive 14mm hex. But just get it in there, loosen her up. I've got my breaker bar with the same 14mm hex on the end, And I'm gonna crack that screen loose on the inside of here. There we go, there's the oil screen. That's a little bit more crap than I'd like to see on there, but really not metal shavings, just some more of that gasket goop that's on there. So we'll give this a good clean. Screen can go right back in. Now, I actually talked to a Ducati mechanic after filming this video, and he said that Ducati doesn't even have them remove the screen unless there's a lot of buildup on that magnetic drain plug. So the dealership won't always pull the exhaust on the oil screen, which would make this procedure much faster and easier, but it never hurts to be thorough and make sure everything looks the way it should. We'll take the cap, put it back in its place, start threading it by hand, and then one last time back to the 14. Okay, now time to fill it back up with oil. So get a funnel, stick it in your fill hole right there. And this bike right here takes 3.5 quarts, which is about 3.8 liters. This is a 4-liter jug of oil, so it's gonna take most of it. But always err on the side of caution. It's better to underfill versus overfill because it's way easier to add more oil than it is to take drain plugs out or siphon oil out of the top. So definitely start on the low end and then go from there. All right, so I've got what I think is the right amount of oil in here. You can see I'm just barely showing any oil in that sight glass, but keep in mind the bike is resting on the side stand right now. So we'll give it a quick fire up and then let the oil level settle and see what we're looking like. Cool, and now I'll cut it off, and Case is gonna be my helper and check the oil level while I keep the bike level.
Yeah, you're in between the two marks.
Yeah?
Good.
Got it first try, don't even need to add any more oil in there. So, now it's time to figure out how to get this exhaust back on the bike. Boom! We are all done. Now the last step is just getting rid of your old oil, and an empty oil container that we have from filling up the bike works perfectly. All right, and now we have a jug full of oil. I'll seal that back off and take it over to the auto parts store and leave it with them. Now, not every bike has this, but this Ducati does. It has a service reminder, and it's telling me that it needs an oil change. We obviously just did the oil change, so that needs to be reset. And I just did a ton of research, and apparently the owner of this bike can't reset the service light themselves. So you have to go to Ducati unless you are okay with that flashing at you every time you start the bike up, and I know that's gonna drive me crazy. So I guess this needs to go into a dealership anyway, and I don't even know if they're gonna reset the light because they're not the ones that did the oil change. We'll have to see on that. But anyway, we've got this new Hyundai Santa Cruz outside. It's this new baby truck. There's a couple of these coming out. Ford Maverick's another one of them. So I don't think this has really been done yet. Let's see if this motorcycle will fit into a baby truck or if we need to actually take a real truck to get this over to a dealer.
Let's go percentages. What do you think is the likelihood that this works?
I think the rear wheel is still gonna be sitting on the ramp.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
I give it a 80% chance of failure. So this little tonneau cover is definitely not helping our situation.
No, and honestly, I think if it were not there, it'd still be a really, really tight fit. Why don't you go grab a tape measure? We'll know for sure.
So we're looking at about 13 inches from the front of the tire to the back side of the bed. And let's see, the center of the back wheel. Center of the back wheel is also about 13 inches. So even if that front tire was all the way up against the front of the bed, the back tire would just barely be on the tailgate. Definitely not at a comfortable spot for hauling this any distance at all.
So there you go, guys. What is probably the hardest oil change on any motorcycle that I know of. You know, it's not a really hard process. It's just, it takes way longer than an oil change should. So if you have one of these bikes, don't be afraid to tackle it yourself. Just know that there are bikes out there where the process is much, much easier. I'm a little bit annoyed, actually very annoyed about the service light that needs to be reset. If we run into any major issues with that, we'll be sure to let you know. But for now, thanks for watching. Don't forget to head on over to tflbike.com, and we'll catch you in the next video.